Judges, would you please introduce yourselves?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Barnhart. I'm currently in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm an attorney that works at the Indiana Attorney General's office. I serve as the chief counsel and the director of the Consumer Protection Division, which focuses on protecting consumers throughout Indiana. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say today.
Hi, I'm Marcia Holland. I'm an attorney in Missoula, Montana. My legal career was spent primarily in Fairbanks, Alaska as a public defender, but now I teach at the law school in Missoula. And I've been involved with We the People for quite a while, and I'm so excited that we were able to have a We the People national competition this year. So thank you for being here.
Good morning. My name is Becca Steinhoff. I am joining today from Casper, Wyoming. I am the executive director of the John P. L. Bogan Foundation, which is a private family foundation that carries out grant making here in the great state of Wyoming.
If you could introduce yourselves, that would be great.
Nice to meet you all. We're definitely excited to be here on this wonderful Sunday morning. We're Irvington High School's Unit 6 team. My name is Surya Teja Mandadi.
My name is Andrew Ching.
I'm Vignesh Santul Kumar, writing the judges, our coach, Mr. Martinez, and a timekeeper.
All right, welcome. Well, I will read question number 2 and give you time for your opening statement. President Eisenhower said we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Do you agree or disagree? Why? What disagreements do the founders have about a standing military or standing army, and are they relevant today? To what extent should there be an international U.S. military presence? You may begin.
We agree with President Eisenhower's statement that since 1961, the military-industrial complex has rapidly expanded, resulting in negative consequences. The military-industrial complex is a combination of private and public forces surrounding our military policy and defense industry. From 1961 to today, the defense budget nearly doubled from $415 to $700 billion, accounting for inflation. The US spends more militarily than the next 10 countries combined. Companies in the military-industrial complex like Northrop Grumman, Boeing, and Lockheed Martin have been able to increase their profits and influence, spending about $126 million on lobbying and employing over 770 lobbyists in 2018 alone.
The military-industrial complex tries to influence a military-centric foreign policy, leading to U.S. involvement in areas such as Iraq, which have cost the U.S. trillions of dollars and thousands of lives, while subsequently destabilizing these regions. One company, Halliburton, gained $39.5 billion in contracts from the Iraq War. More recently, the U.S. sold weapons and gear to Saudi Arabia in its war with Yemen, where Saudi Arabia has been accused of committing war crimes.
The military-industrial complex does have some upsides. These companies typically provide manufacturing jobs, as over 10% of U.S. factory output goes towards weapon making. Additionally, technological advancements like the internet, GPS, and the EpiPen were all results of innovation in military research.
This massive expansion in the American military-industrial complex has resulted in one of the world's most powerful standing armies. Many founders would not only oppose this broad expansion, but would oppose the concept of a standing army itself. This sentiment spread as a result of the British soldiers who were stationed strictly to enforce Parliament's unjust taxes on the colonists.
In his speech to the Virginia Ratifying Convention, Patrick Henry argued, "A standing army we shall have, also to execute the exorable commands of tyranny." Other founders agreed with the potential tyrannical nature of a standing army, but understood the need for defense against foreign threats. In Federalist 4, John Jay argues for a centralized singular government with a national army that better deter and defend against international powers.
The increased influence of the military-industrial complex today does validate some concerns of the founders. However, they could not foresee the rapid technological advancement and globalization transforming the US into a global superpower. This newfound position at the international stage requires a standing army to preserve global alliances, economic interests, and humanitarian values.
Despite this prominent international role, the US should lower its international military presence across the world and shift towards cyber warfare, considering the recent attacks from foreign adversaries. Russian agents in 2016 hacked DNC computers, released the stolen information, and compromised election systems in over 7 states.
In fact, in 2018, out of 230 data breaches on the US government, 2/3 were espionage committed by foreign governments, and the US economy has lost $1.2 trillion to stolen intellectual property. However, the US is severely underprepared as cybersecurity is just 2% of the national military budget. There also must be a higher standard for the extent of military intervention. The US should move away from wars and conflicts based on the acquisition of power and to only intervene if there's a clear and vital national security threat or an ongoing humanitarian crisis.
However, the US should initially always use diplomacy and international bodies to try to decrease tensions and foster peace before potential military intervention. Thus, the US should try to free itself from the influence of the military-industrial complex and work towards building a more peaceful world. Thank you.
Thank you. So in order to have a military presence, we have to have a military. So do you think that the draft serves a purpose anymore? And if so, should all persons be required to join the draft or register for the draft?
Well, I personally am a proponent of the military draft, as I believe it is a citizen's duty to enroll in the draft, especially once they're 18. However, I should believe it should be extended from not just males, but for men and women, as I believe that with the new 21st century military, with the use of drones and other technological advancements, it is more towards deployment from other regions rather than on the ground troops. Thus, both, in my opinion, both women and men can serve in the military.
Yeah, I would agree that the draft is something we should have in current day society because what it would do is increase our reserve forces. Currently, the National Guard Bureau head, Joseph Lengel, to reform our military, suggests increasing our reserve forces from 800,000 to 1 million and further cutting our active duty forces, which would save around $30 billion. By instituting the draft, we can have more reserve forces, people on standby, rather than having to recruit people who would actively participate in our military.
Thank you.
You just mentioned the National Guard, so I want to dig in a little bit more on that. Under what circumstances, if any, should that National Guard or those reserves be deployed domestically?
So
These
last
should be.
year, there
Go
were
ahead.
protests going around across the United States in response to the brutal killing of George Floyd. And in Portland, Oregon, we have seen many rioters and anarchists actually destroy public property and destroy the peaceful environment of the city. And that was when even the Democratic mayor of Portland actually called in the National Guard, and also people support this National Guard deployment to preserve the peaceful order in the city.
Yeah, the National Guard is extremely vital in times of crises. We saw them help throughout the Hurricane Katrina in 2006, as well as many of the forest fires we saw here in California. And more recently, we saw the National Guard be extremely active in the COVID-19 effort, as hundreds of professionals were deployed by the Department of Defense in areas like California, New Jersey, and Texas. And we further saw in terms of vaccinations, there's over 100 teams that were tasked in the beginning of March, tasked with administering over 6,000 vaccines per day, and are currently being deployed as in line with our national vaccine rollout.
However, going back to the point made by my colleague Andrew on deploying the National Guard to quell protests, I, however, disagree with this, as I believe that the National Guard can sometimes entice further protests, as according to the Brennan Center for Justice, we have seen that but sometimes increased police presence and increased National Guard presence can in fact make these protests seem more violent, as these protesters feel antagonized and thus feel they need to react to these National Guard members. Thus, I think there must be clear and there must be a civilian panel meant to observe and protect these to make sure that there's not abuse of power by the National Guard.
Thank you.
What impact would defunding the military or relying more on the National Guard have with respect to the United States' reputation to the world and other superpowers?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sure. What impact would have, so if you're saying we need more reliant on the National Guard, we need to kind of retract a little bit and defund the military, if you will, what impact would that have on America's reputation with respect to the world and as a superpower?
Well, decreasing, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I believe that currently in many countries, the America has a bad influence, has had a bad sort of reputation in these countries, especially in like Latin America and the Middle East, as these countries see the Americas as being the source of tyranny and sort of invading their homelands. For example, terrorist organizations like Al Qaeda have cited American intervention as one of the major recruiting factors for them being able to recruit more terrorists. So I believe that U.S. intervention militarily has had a negative impact, and thus by defunding and maybe using more economic means like the Center on Foreign Relations suggests, we can use sanctions and other economic means using the U.S. hegemony on the dollar to further our influence while also making sure we don't have this sort of negative impact in these countries.
However, in an era of strategic competition, our adversaries, China and Russia, are increasing their military budget, especially China, which is keen on engaging in an arms race in its sphere of influence in the South China Sea, along the Taiwan Strait, in the East China Sea. So we can see, according to a Brookings Institute article, that China actually views a decrease in American military power as an opportunity, and therefore our superpower status may be slightly affected by a decrease in our military funding.
So let me ask this. Should we have something comparable to a military presence that is a diplomatic presence? A lot of times foreign diplomats are appointed as basically an honorary position and don't really have much interaction with the locations where they're sent to. Should we have something like a diplomatic corps that is a robust corps that is working on the non-military side of building relationships with other countries?
I would actually argue that rather than having a diplomatic presence in many of these countries, that we should rely on many of the foreign bodies that we're a part of, such as NATO. Currently, under the Trump administration, we've seen less commitment to NATO and military operations as we withdrew over 12,000 troops from our NATO ally, Germany. So rather than focusing on having our own diplomats in these countries and our own people to sort of build these nations, we should increase our partnerships with NATO, such as investing in more democracy in areas like Ukraine and Eastern Europe, which would show pressure on Russia. So I believe we should be using our regional allies and our international bodies that we already have established, rather than introducing our own diplomats in many of these regions.
Thank you.
However, these international bodies can sometimes be ineffective, as seen with issues like climate change, where, according to the report, The Truth Behind Climate Pledges, we have seen that many of these nations, while they have promised to cut their emissions according to the Paris Accords, many of these nations have not lived up to their goals, and some nations like China and India have actually increased their carbon emissions. Thus, these diplomatic negotiations through these international bodies can sometimes be ineffective, especially in the UN, where the Security Council is made up by Russia and China, both, and the US, which all have veto power over legislation by the UN. Thus, I believe that we do need these diplomatic quarters with the US individually, as these international bodies can at times be ineffective.
Thank you.
Why did the framers ensure civilian control of the military?
Sorry, my mic keeps cutting out again. If you could repeat the question.
Yeah, that's fine. So why did the framers of the Constitution ensure that there was civilian control? Oh, no time.
Sorry.
You can think about that for later. We all will. Thanks.
All right, so nicely done, good job. Give you a few comments. I thought particularly in your opening, you had very good use of stats and facts. I particularly appreciated kind of supporting your position, both in your paper, also in follow-up. I certainly appreciate the disagreement, right? These are not easy questions, in terms of the runaway military, but if we start retracting, that can have some implications as well, and perhaps some unintended consequences. So you certainly have thought about this thoroughly, and I appreciate the discussion. Well done.
I'll agree with my colleague. The prepared remarks were really interesting to me in the sense that they answered the questions, all of the questions, very well and provided factual information to back them up, including from 1961 on what the world started to look like. So I appreciate that, you realize that President Eisenhower was predicting what would happen after he was not president anymore. I also liked your answers to many of the questions in the sense that they were robust conversations. You often didn't agree, but you shed light from different perspectives, which I think is really important in just looking at how the world works. And I appreciate you have that kind of insight. And in particular, I like the conversation about the National Guard in the sense that what was happening in Portland is very different than what was happening with Hurricane Katrina. And then you circled back to what was happening with the vaccines. And that just was really impressive in terms of a presence that can be so useful in so many different ways. So thank you very much for a great conversation.
I would echo so much of what has been said. I really enjoyed your prepared remarks. It was easy to follow. You clearly addressed each of the questions, and it's nice to not have to go searching for those answers, but they were just laid out in a thoughtful and intentional way for us. And I think from there was just a strong sense of coherence between where you started with your prepared remarks and then through some of those questions. And so a lot of linkages and strong examples provided in the questions that we asked. We can't say enough that it's nice to hear you disagree or have a different perspective. So you did that very well and respectfully. And so thanks for providing all of those different insights. I think this went very well. So thanks for your preparation and well done.
Thank you for all the feedback.